simile. I'll start from Meherabad.
Jai Baba. Everyone and everything is everyone and everything at the same time and for all time. Meher Baba. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. Thanks to beloved Baba, Jai Baba to all of you. We are reading God Speaks. We are on part 6. The title of the chapter, the title of the part is Summary of States of Divine Consciousness. So since it is a summary, it might appear to be very repetitive, which it is. This is just to anchor us more and more into Baba's words. And we are reading page number 58. Start. Page number 58, God Speaks.
To give a simile, let us consider, for instance, a gross conscious human Atma as a soul on earth, which we take as a standard for the gross plane, far flung from the sun, which, for instance, for the purpose of our simile only, we take as the source of energy of the subtle and the source of mind of the mental. The simile of sun and earth must never be misconstrued as the sun and earth of the solar system.
So now Baba is trying to explain to us in a very simple manner, assuming that the sun is the source of energy of the subtle, and assuming that the sun is the source of mind of the mental, and assuming the earth as an atma with a gross conscious human atma. And then Baba clarifies, please do not mistake this sun, our sun, as the source of energy, because it is just equally a part of the illusion, and it's just a mild dot in the entire creation.
This sun, which we have now adopted as our standard, sheds its rays of energy and mind continuously and simultaneously on the earth, which we have taken as the standard for the gross. And the gross conscious human soul on earth, conscious only of the gross, unconsciously imbibes from the sun's rays the energy of the subtle by making in the gross world the fullest use of the aspects of this energy in the form of nuclear energy. Also, this gross conscious human soul on earth unconsciously makes use in the gross world of the aspects of mind, such as thoughts, desires, and emotions, which it also imbibes from this sun's rays.
So, in other words, the gross conscious human soul on earth is utilizing the energy of the sun unconsciously, not knowing how it is using, and the mind of the mental world, again coming from the sun as the source, unconsciously and without knowing how he is doing it. So Baba is going step by step what we have already done in the past, that a gross conscious human soul, although unconscious of the subtle world and the mental world, utilizes the energy of the subtle world indirectly and unconsciously, and utilizes the mind of the mental world, that means the thoughts, feelings, emotions, indirectly and unconsciously, without realizing directly how it is using. So now Baba is giving this simile, an example.
For the purpose of continuing our simile, we shall now take the subtle conscious human soul as a soul in air, and hence much nearer this sun than the gross conscious human Atma on earth.
So the gross conscious human Atma as a simile is on earth. Now that gross conscious human Atma becomes subtle conscious human Atma, which means now he is not on earth, he is in the air, which means he is nearer or closer to the source of energy and the source of mind, which for our purpose we have taken as the sun.
This subtle conscious human soul in air is conscious only of the subtle, consciously imbibes the fullest energy from this sun.
Consciously imbibes. Here, note the word. Because this person now, the Atma now, is a subtle conscious Atma and he's supposed to be in the air as a simile, therefore, he is consciously using the energy of the subtle world but unconsciously using the mind of the mental world and the gross aspect from earth. Go ahead.
Which is the source of energy.
Can you read this again?
So, sure.
This subtle
This
conscious.
subtle conscious human soul in
In-
air is conscious only of the subtle, consciously imbibes the fullest energy from this sun, which is the source of energy, and consciously makes use of this tremendous energy in its nascent form.
Nascent form would mean just coming into existence, newly released infant, like that. That means now the subtle conscious human soul is very comfortably placed in the subtle world, using the energy of the subtle world consciously for whatever purpose the Atma wants to use the energy.
Thus, this subtle conscious human soul is capable of wielding tremendous power and is quite capable of giving sight to the blind or limbs to the maimed. This is the domain of the first three planes, and the capability of this soul to liberate energy in any intensity is achieved according to the degree of subtle consciousness gained by it in the second and third planes.
So we have seen that the subtle world is the first, second, and the third plane. The first is like a go between the gross and the subtle, and the fourth is like a go between the third and the fifth. So a person in the subtle world has the control over energy. It can release energy and it can do any miracles that it wants to do, depending upon the station, whether it is in the first plane or second plane or third plane or even on the fourth plane.
While the subtle conscious human soul, in its realm of energy, consciously makes use of energy in its nascent state, it is unconscious of the mental.
We have done this again and again and again, that a person in the subtle world is conscious only of energy of the subtle world, is unconscious of the gross, and is unconscious of the mental. Although he appears to eat, drink, sleep, talk, walk, whatever it is, as a gross conscious human being does, and also he is using the mind of the mental by way of desires and emotions and thoughts, yeah. But he doesn't know how he is doing it. He is doing it unconsciously. So here Baba says that
While the subtle conscious
therefore unconsciously it makes use of the aspect of the mind, such as thoughts, desires and emotions, but consciously makes use of the energy of the subtle world. Depending where you are placed, gross, subtle or mental, you use that plane consciously and the other two planes unconsciously.
Thus, though it is capable of wielding tremendous power through its consciousness of energy, it is susceptible to getting entangled by mind while making use of the aspects of mind unconsciously.
Susceptible means likely to be caught up, likely to be affected. We have seen it, and as I said, this is a repetition, this is a summary. Baba says that the subtle conscious human being has full energy, full power, but he has got control over the energy. He can transmit energy, he can change, he can do anything with the energy, but he is not in the mental world, so he can be overpowered by thoughts, feelings and emotions, by desires, and therefore it's a very tricky situation to be in. He has control over the energy, but no control over his mind. And that is a very risky spot to be in.
So, entitled by small mind
Hmm.
making use of as a
Can you repeat again? Susceptible to getting entangled, sorry, एक minute. Entangled by mind, but with individual mind, while making use of the aspect of mind, which is capital M, unconsciously. So again, repeating, a person who is on the first, second, third and fourth plane has full control of the energy, but no control of the mind, and there is a possibility, there is a probability that he would be tricked into, let's see, using his powers in order to fulfill his desires. And if he does that, then he falls back into the stone state.
For this reason, this subtle conscious human soul, although mighty powerful, sometimes slides down to the lower level of subtle consciousness while making conscious use of its energy in the form of miraculous powers.
So here Baba says that he may come down to a lower level of subtle consciousness, but if a Kuber or a Mahayogi, the person who's on the fourth plane, misuses his powers, Baba has said that he can even go back to the stone state, and all the effort that he has made to come up to that level of the fourth plane, the consciousness disintegrates, the consciousness shatters, and he goes down to the stone state.
To be more precise, the subtle conscious human soul is either in the first or second or third plane according to the degree of subtle consciousness gained, or one may say that the domain of the subtle sphere comprises the first, second and third planes.
So since now Baba is only talking about the first, second and third plane, he did not talk about consciousness being shattered. That means if there is a misuse, let us say, of a person on the third plane, then he can be pushed down to a lower level of second plane. But that option is not available to the Mahayogi. If he misuses, then he goes all the way down to the stone state.
Now, the fourth plane is that state of consciousness which draws a line of demarcation between the domain of the subtle world and the domain of the mental world. In other words, the subtle conscious human Atma on the fourth plane is like a human soul standing on the threshold of the mental world, which delimits the subtle world from the mental world.
In other words, that's a demarcation line, that's a threshold between the subtle and the mental world, the fourth plane, which is all powerful.
Therefore, the subtle conscious human soul at the stage of consciousness of the fourth plane is fully conscious of the first, second and third planes and experiences in full the subtle world, and so is completely conscious of the tremendous energy of the subtle world.
So now a person on the fourth plane, obviously as you progress further, you have control over all the lower planes. So a person who's on the fourth plane knows everything about the first, second and the third plane.
Thus, this human soul on the threshold of the mental world, commanding the energy at its height, is now nearest to the domain of mind, which is the mental world, and thus is much more susceptible to the overpowering forces of the aspects of the mind, namely the thoughts, desires and emotions.
So what I understand is the person on the first plane is far removed from the mind in a sense compared to the fourth plane. So because a person is very close to the mental world, the thoughts, feelings and emotions and desires are very overpowering because he is closest to the mental world, and the mental world depicts thoughts, feelings, emotions and desires.
And although this subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane consciously makes use of the subtle world's energy at its zenith, it is still unconscious of mind.
Correct, because he is still in the domain of the energy world, which is the subtle world. So he has full power of the energy world, but he is unconscious of the mind. That means he has no control over mind. He has no control over his thoughts, feelings, emotions and desires. So this is again, as we keep repeating, a very tricky place to be in. I have got huge energy. I can do anything. A person on the fourth plane can create new life, create new universes. To bring back a dead man alive is child's play for such a person. So he is obviously tempted to, show off his powers or to use his powers for good or for bad. And that is why this plane is a plane also known as the dark night of the soul.
It therefore unconsciously makes use of the aspects of mind which are now too overpowering and thus most alluring for this soul, which, so to speak, has to face and bear the full blast of the aspects of the mind, thoughts, desires, and emotions at their highest.
Full blast would mean full power, full explosion, because he is so close to the mind, but yet he is not mind. But although he is close to the mind, he has got full powers, he has got full energy at his command, he can just do anything. And that is why Baba says that the full blast of the mind, which means the full blast of desires and thoughts and feelings and emotions are there, and he is very tempted to use those powers.
This situation for the human soul on the fourth plane is extremely dangerous since it is extremely treacherous. Here, the soul, equipped with highest energy, which can be put to use either for the best or for the worst, has to maintain a sort of equilibrium of two forces at their zenith.
There are two forces at the zenith, full power and full blast of temptation to use those powers.
That is the height of the energy of the subtle world and the overpowering height of aspects of the mind of the mental world. If this human soul on the fourth plane, while unconsciously using the aspects of mind, is overcome by the overpowering allurements of these aspects, thoughts, desires, and emotions, he then cannot resist using energy at its climax for the worst by performing powerful miracles such as raising the dead, curing the blind, the sick, and the maimed, etc., just to satisfy his own overpowering desires.
Now, here it's good that let us understand. Baba is saying here that if at that level, if he is lured or if he is allured by these thoughts, and if he cannot using energy at its climate for the worst, in other words, bringing back a dead man is the worst use of energy. Giving sight to the blind is the worst use of energy.
Maimed.
Giving limbs to the maimed. According to spirituality, that is not the spiritual use of the energy. It is a material use. The same miracles, if a perfect master does, that is okay, because he is all powerful, all knowledge, all bliss. But here he hasn't experienced that. He doesn't know what is right from wrong. He may think that I am helping somebody. So here the underlying factor is that why does he use it? Here see it, just to satisfy his own overpowering desires. He just wants to prove to himself and to the world that here is a dead man. I am just saying, wake up, and the dead man gets up and walks. So for his own self-aggrandization, for satisfying his own ego, if he is using the powers, then according to Baba's literature, it is the worst use of powers, or it is a misuse of powers, and that can land him into deep, deep trouble.
He is even capable of creating the whole world of forms with all of its creation. So great is the power obtained
He can
from
create new world of forms. Can you imagine? That is the power.
the energy at its height, of which this subtle conscious human soul is conscious.
If he is conscious, in other words, to some extent we can interpret that if I am conscious in the subtle world of the energy, I am accountable and responsible for those acts. In the gross world, I am conscious of actions, so I am accountable and responsible for my actions, not for my thoughts, not for my desires, not for my emotions, not for anything, because I am not in the mental world. So, in the same way, a person in the energy world, which is the subtle world, is responsible for the use of energy. A person in the mental world is responsible for the use of his mind. So, whichever domain that we are in, gross, subtle, or mental, if we are conscious of that, then we are responsible. This is my interpretation. We are unconscious. Now, I think the last session we did, that I may get any kind of thoughts, dirty thoughts, vulgar thoughts, sinful thoughts, blah, 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 thoughts. But to that extent, I am not accountable for the simple reason. I will be accountable if I put those thoughts into action. Because my responsibility is action. In the gross world, my responsibility is action and not thoughts or feelings or emotions or desires. Let them come, let them go. But if a person on the mental world uses his desires or to fulfill his desires or emotions or thoughts, then he is responsible for those things. So whichever domain that we are in, we are responsible for those actions.
Thus, this misuse of energy at its zenith, through the medium and the overpowering allurements of the aspects of mind, also at their zenith, creates a sort of tremendous, irreparable short circuit in the two fundamental supernatural forces of energy at its zenith in the shape of stupendous power, and of mind at its zenith in the shape of irresistible desire, resulting in an unimaginably tremendous clash and explosion in the advanced consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul of the fourth plane.
Because both these aspects are at its height. The energy, supreme. The mind, supreme. The desire, supreme. So, if it is put into use, energy is put into use, then Baba says there will be like a short circuit, irreparable. That it cannot be, in a sense, that there's nothing you can do about it. That particular Atma's consciousness is shattered, is disintegrated, and he comes to start his journey right from the stone state.
Absolute disturbance is thus created in the consciousness of the soul, resulting in downright disintegration of the advanced consciousness of this human soul. Thereupon, this subtle conscious human soul invariably falls to the lowest level of consciousness, which is the most finite type of consciousness of the crudest form. Therefore, this human soul has to take the form of stone and has again to go through the process of evolution.
Imagine what should I say? The unluckiness, what is it called? He's so unlucky, the person is so unlucky in a sense that he has to start the entire evolutionary process again. Imagine stone, metal, minerals, vegetables, worms, fish, bird, animal, human beings, 84 lakhs of reincarnation, involution, and then he comes to, it means millions and millions of years are all lost.
Example of a gross conscious scientist.
Now Baba is giving us an example that we can understand as to example of a gross conscious scientist.
Let us try to explain this situation by an illustration of what sometimes occurs even on the gross plane.
Baba was talking about the subtle plane, the Kuber or the Mahayogi of the subtle plane. Now Baba is giving us an example which we can understand on the gross plane.
To an ordinary human being who handles tremendous power and who is, more often than not, overcome by an intense desire to demonstrate his powers. Let us compare then a subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane such as described above with a great scientist of repute in the gross world. The latter being fully conscious of the gross plane by sheer dint of effort and much investigation into the fields of the science of energies, fully realizes the possibility of releasing tremendous energy through certain experiments. This scientist, we will assume, for the purpose of our illustration, gradually becomes fully conscious of the tremendous energy that has come within his reach and which will ultimately come under his complete control. He then desires intensely to make use of it. Even when this gross conscious scientist in the gross world is conscious of the highest possible gross aspect of energy, he is not at all conscious of that energy in its nascent state.
The energy in its nascent state is in the subtle world. He may be using the energy, we all use the energy of the subtle world, but he is not conscious of the energy in its nascent, in its
State.
infant, how it originates in state, which is the subtle, and therefore he is unconscious of that aspect of energy which is of the subtle world. That's why Baba says that irrespective of how much progress a scientist may do in the gross world, they are far, far away from even the fringe of the subtle world. We should never think that we have made such advances in the, which you can say, in the material world, in the gross world, that is why we are very close to the subtle. No, they are in a totally different domain. Can you read again?
Even when this gross conscious scientist in the gross world is conscious of the highest possible gross aspect of energy, he is not at all conscious of that energy in its nascent state, which is only of the domain of the subtle world and which can only be experienced and controlled by the subtle conscious human soul and which can never, under any circumstances, be experimented with or experienced by any gross conscious human being.
Because it is belonging to a different domain. Energy belongs to the subtle world, and whatever we do with the energy in the gross plane, we do it unconsciously without really knowing what energy is all about. Only a person in the subtle world will be able to experience and manipulate energy, and not anybody in the gross world.
Therefore, when this gross conscious scientist in the gross world on earth is conscious of the highest possible gross aspects of nuclear energy, he is actually fully conscious of only one of the highest gross aspects of energy of the domain of the subtle world. And when this scientist, who is conscious of one of the highest gross aspects of energy, which is now entirely under his control, is overpowered by an intense desire, which is also the highest aspect of mind of the mental world, to use it, then the scientist's whole career hangs in the balance and it is thus very often at stake.
Again, same thing. On one hand, the gross conscious human being who is a scientist is aware of the highest aspect of the gross aspect of the energy, the nuclear energy, and he is now overcome with the mind. That means he is now very desirous, he is very tempted to try out his experiment, to try out what he has made. After several years of experimenting, he has made something and now he wants to experiment with it.
It is at this juncture of conflicting thoughts which, on the one hand, provoke the scientist to demonstrate his power, and on the other hand, soothe him to become reticent, that the scientist has to be extremely careful to maintain an equilibrium, that is, balancing the tremendous aspects of energy at his disposal. It rests with him either to use it for the welfare of the world or to misuse it for its devastating effects, or not to use it at all.
Now that scientist has got full control of the gross aspect of energy. If the word used is reticent, which means if he is restrained, if he is controlled, if he is reluctant to give vent to his own ego, then it's a difference. So either he can use it or for good, or he can use it for bad, or he can just leave it as it is and not use it at all. So it is all dependent upon that scientist.
He is confronted with the irresistible overpowering force of the predominant aspect of mind in the shape of intense desires which haunt him with fame, name, and power, tickling his ego to the utmost towards selfish ends, irrespective of the potential destruction and devastation which can be wrought.
Can be wrought means which can be inflicted, which can be very injurious to humanity. So if he is tickled for his name, fame and ego, and if he wants to experiment with it, then it can be very devastating.
If the scientist succumbs, therefore, to this overweening desire, which is now at its zenith and is thereby directed for his selfish ends to misuse the power that he controls in the form of one of the highest aspects of energy, he then consciously leads himself to attempt to explode the most deadly weapon in his control, more powerful than, say, the latest hydrogen bomb. If at this stage that
It is.
if it is at this stage that the crucial point is reached, the scientist explodes his weapon, spreading devastating results, and the equilibrium which was thus far very narrowly maintained between use of power and overpowering desire is absolutely disturbed.
So now there was a very fine, thin line balance of having the energy, one of the aspects of the nuclear energy in his hand, and overpowering. So now he has desires to use it. Now it seems that he has given to the desires for his name, for his fame, not realizing what devastation it can cause to the population, nothing of that sort, and now he is exploding the weapon.
This scientist could not content himself and was incapable of maintaining an equilibrium or balance between the tremendous aspect of energy that lay latent in his weapon, which fortified him with power, and the intense desire to explode the weapon, consciously unmindful of the unimaginable result. The tragedy of the whole thing was that this scientist, being conscious and of and intensely self-interested in the result of the explosion of the bomb, was the first to be directly affected by the blast of the explosion, despite all of the necessary precautions taken.
So he is the first one to be affected. He blasts this weapon and he is the first one to be affected.
The immediate consequence to himself was that at first he was completely overpowered by his own experiment and was aghast, and he fell flat on the ground, absolutely unconscious. To add to this tragedy, when he regained his consciousness, he regained it at what cost? He had completely forgotten his state as a great and advanced scientist, and he was also incapable of remembering his immediate past, his boyhood, and his activities as a young man with all of the associations with wife, children, and friends.
In other words, when this blast was, let's say, released, he was the first person to be affected and he was unconscious. And to add to the tragedy, he does not even remember, he doesn't remember, he doesn't have a recollection that he was a great scientist and that he has a wife and children and all that. So everything has been forgotten. He doesn't know himself. He's like a dementia sort of, just the same way as a Kuber or a fourth planer, when he misuses his powers, he goes back to the stone state. He's not even aware that what a great, tremendous height he had achieved, that a little control would have helped him to go into the fifth plane, which is the mental plane, from which there is no slide down, and just one plane below God realization, if he had gone to the sixth. So such a great height he achieved, and because of his giving into the temptation of name and fame, he has slid. In the same way, the scientist consciously is aware of the tremendous impact that he has about this use of nuclear power, and in spite of knowing it, consciously uses it, and he is the first one to be affected. He forgets everything of what he was.
The greatest change that took place in him was that he did not even feel that he had lost anything. That is, his memory and his consciousness of being a great scientist. The doctors call such an occurrence a case of amnesia.
Amnesia is loss of memory. So the unluckiest part is that he doesn't know himself. He doesn't know that he was at just a moment ago, he was at the helm of the affair.
He had consciousness only of the fact that he was a man of the most rudimentary type.
Basic.
He then started his life afresh, never once imagining that he had lived the life of a great man of science who had under his control vast and tremendous forces of energy. In a similar fashion occurs the tragedy of the most advanced, subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane. He, being energy personified, misuses the energy at its zenith in the subtle world and consequently loses all consciousness except the most finite consciousness, which, according to the law of evolution, has to take the most crude form of stone to experience that most finite consciousness. One of the functions of perfect masters is to guard the soul of the fourth plane from wrecking his spiritual career through the misuse of divine powers. This is an
So
asterisk.
one of the aspects of perfect masters, we had done this earlier, they always keep a watch on this fourth planar, lest he may misuse his powers and bring an end to his own development and he goes back to the stone state. So the perfect master would either pull him up to the fifth, where there is no power, we did that yesterday, or he may push him down to the third, or he may take the powers away so that he doesn't do any harm to himself.
There's an asterisk. Being asked by the editors about Jesus' temptations, Meher Baba replied, "The truth is that Jesus was not tempted by Satan, but that Jesus got himself tempted and he overcame the temptations. There was a great purpose behind this. He had to get himself tempted, thereby, he shouldered the burden of the forces of temptations that predominated in the world. Jesus then overcame all the temptations and in that way created a tremendous force which acted as a great setback to the forces of universal temptations. The same was true in the case of Buddha, and it is the same every time in avataric periods. Whenever God manifests on earth as avatar, his godhood gives a universal push and the result is universal. That is, not only the humanity reaps the benefit, but everything in the whole creation reaps the benefit of the universal push."
So here what Baba is trying to say, Jesus was the avatar. He was a prophet, he was the son of God, the Messiah of God. Cannot be tempted. But he got himself tempted. In other words, he took all the temptation, the whole aspect of temptation in entire creation upon himself. And then he overcame the temptation, thereby giving a sort of a setback to the entire temptation that was around the entire creation. The same thing I had heard somewhere, Shirdi Sai Baba. There is something called gluttony. Gluttony is eating too much, all the time eating. He had what is called as a chobo. We call it a chova, a fat man. And all the time, what he has to do is just keep on eating and eating and eating. So anybody would bring anything to Sai Baba, Shirdi Sai Baba, he would give it to that person and that person would keep on eating and eating. And the explanation that I got from somewhere is that gluttony is also kind of a negative aspect of humankind. So Sai Baba would center all the gluttony aspect of gluttony into one being, and then when he helps this being, automatically the entire aspect of gluttony is taken care of. So like that with anger, like that with lust, like that with greed, every time the avatar comes, he would have one person who would be representing the aspect of that greed or lust or anger, or in this case temptation. Of course, in temptation he took it upon himself, but there are sometimes, as I understand, in the mandali, in the circle members, where he would be gathering all those samskaras in one person and then putting a match into that, and then the whole thing is burnt out.
Very often, if the soul of the fourth plane is about to lose control of his mind, his powers are snatched away by the perfect masters who can control the minds of all subtle conscious and gross conscious souls. The cases of actual downfall are accordingly rare and occur as exceptions to the rule.
That means the falling down from the fourth plane is a very, very rare occurrence. But the possibility is there. Very rare occurrence.
They must ultimately be attributed not to any failure in the vigilance maintained by the perfect masters, but to the original urge within God Himself.
This original urge within God Himself, starting from the beyond state of God, stage 1, rather stage 2, the urge actually arose and manifested in the beyond state of God. So many times many questions were asked to Baba, like somebody asked that, who will become a perfect master, or who will become a mazub or a salik, or who will get just liberation, mukti, moksha, salvation. And Baba's answers would be that all these things are already predestined in the initial urge which came about. So here also Baba says that if somebody on the fourth plane falls down to the stone state, which is a very, very rare occurrence, it is not because of the negligence of the perfect master to have a control or to have an eye on the fourth planar, but it is already built, it is already factored or built into in the initial urge.
So, it is literally true that each and everything, small or great, that happens in the universe happens only according to the will of the Almighty. Here, it is important to know that though it is an established fact that once full consciousness is gained in the human form, it is virtually never lost. Yet, in this case of the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane, there is the possibility of losing the consciousness gained.
That means there is only one exception. Once the consciousness is gained, it is only progressive, it just moves forward. There's no question of coming back. But this is the only exception where a person misuses his powers, can go back, but it's a very, very rare occurrence.
This occurs if the powers of the fourth plane are misused and if the equilibrium is not maintained with the highest energy at command, counterbalanced by the overpowering allurement of infinite desires, which are the highest aspect of mind. Though the three fundamental aspects of mind are thoughts, desires, and emotions, the desires form the highest aspect of mind.
And that is why Baba's message is, that it is the desires which keeps us linked to the reincarnation process. Therefore, Baba says desire only for desirelessness. Hope to rise above all hopes. Want nothing and you will have everything. So it is the desires which are like hooks, it's not straight. It's like a hook, and which keeps on, anchoring us, hooking us to keep on taking birth after birth after birth.
But if the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane does not misuse the energy commanded by it and maintains the equilibrium by discrete use of infinite energy for the best, then this soul on the fourth plane not only crosses this threshold of the fourth plane and enters the domain of the fifth and sixth planes of the mental world, but gains consciousness of the sixth plane directly.
So here we need to be a little careful, because sometimes we can misunderstand. Here Baba says, if the person on the fourth plane, I'll repeat the whole thing. If but if the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane does not misuse the energy commanded by it and maintains the equilibrium by discrete use of infinite energy for the best. For the best, I would interpret for spiritual purposes, not for mundane purposes. Then, this soul on the fourth plane not only crosses this threshold of the fourth plane and enters the domain of the fifth and the sixth planes, which means of the domain of the mind, of the mental world, but gains consciousness of the sixth plane directly, in bold letters directly. So, if on the fourth plane we are maintaining our composure, we are maintaining our equilibrium, and very discreetly using the powers only for the good, only for the spiritual well being of others, then such a soul can directly jump into the sixth plane, bypassing the fifth.
This is because this soul, with subtle consciousness and discrete use of energy at its zenith, was capable of overcoming and resisting the most alluring and overpowering highest aspects of mind, the desires, thoughts, and emotions which were most powerfully treacherous at their zenith. Thus, this subtle conscious human soul g- gains directly the consciousness of the sixth plane by overpowering the desires, thoughts, and emotions at the zenith and becomes their master, who now controls them and even has the capacity to create them.
So, because this person had controlled over the overpowering aspect of the mind, even though he was on the fourth plane with full energy, he is given a double promotion, so to speak, in the sixth plane, where now, because he is in the mental world, now he controls the mind. In the fourth plane, he had no control over the mind, and yet he maintained the equilibrium, the balance. But because of his non-use for mundane purposes, the powers, and because of his maintaining the equilibrium, he got straight into the sixth plane. And now that he is in the sixth plane, in the mental world, in the domain of the mind, he can create thoughts, feelings, emotions, desires. He can manipulate, he can make, he can control, he can do anything with the aspect of the mind.
Some Some subtle conscious human souls neither use nor misuse the tremendous flood of energy at its height, liberated in the subtle world. And when such souls do not fall prey to their desires, which are also at their height, these subtle conscious human souls cross the threshold of the fourth plane and gain the consciousness of the fifth plane in the domain of the mental world. Here, these mental conscious human souls are no longer the slaves of their minds, because they are now conscious of the first state of mind which controls thoughts.
We
The
have seen that the mind have two sections, the fifth plane and the sixth plane. The fifth plane is concerned with the thoughts, and the sixth plane is concerned with the feelings. But before I read this, Soumya reminds me to tell an episode, a story which I believe Erach had said it. Baba must have told Erach, and Erach has said it. A very beautiful story. There was a master, and there were many disciples, and one of the disciples was very enthusiastic, very energetic, and he knew that the master had some kind of a magical word, which if the master tells me, I can have a lot of control over all the things that are happening in the world, and I can do a lot of good in the world. So with all good intention, he was pestering the master, give me that word, give me that word. Means give me that secret, give me that secret. And the master would say, okay, when the time comes, at the proper time, at the appointed time, I'll do it. And very many years went by, and the disciple was feeling very you can say impatient, and say, Master, you must give me the word. I have so much to do in the world. I will do so much of good and all that. So Master said, okay, I'll give it to you. Do one thing. He said, today you go in the outskirts of the village. In those times, there were individual villages and there were jungles. And the villages would have, barbed wires or some kind of fencing, and they would have a gate. It was a gated village. And the gate would be closed in the evening so as to protect the inhabitants from wild animals entering into the village. So he said, you go there and stand the whole day, watch what is happening, everything, and then come back and tell me. Okay. So he goes in the early morning, and the gatekeeper opens, and people go out into the jungle to cut the wood or bring water from the river. Whatever their occupation is, they would do all these things. And he just kept on observing. People are going and coming, going and coming. And as the night falls, the dusk, the sun is just going down, and the gatekeeper has come to close the gate because now it is night time. Just then he sees that there is a very old man, bent with age, having a bundle of sticks, wood sticks on his back, and he is shouting and pleading, wait, please wait for me, don't close the gate, please wait for me. But the gatekeeper had the orders that he should close the gate. So that old man is panting and he's trying to run, but he's too old to run and pleading with the man. But the gatekeeper did not heed his pleading and closed the gate. Now this disciple is watching all these things, and in his blood is boiling, that how can this gatekeeper be so heartless? He's an old man, he's coming, he's beseeching, he's begging that it's a matter of a few seconds that he would have been in, but the gate was closed. And he was really burning inside. And then next day he goes to the master. Master doesn't ask anything immediately, so masters have this habit of just neglecting and ignoring people. And then he said, yeah, you had been, Master, you were supposed to tell me something, you told me to go to the gate, now tell me, what is there? The master is asking, what did you observe? So he said, whole day when just normal, people would go and come, but there is one thing which I hated so much. And then he narrates the whole story. And he says, had you given me that word, I would have stopped that man from closing the gate, and I would have helped that poor old man who had to stay out through the night in the wild jungle, like animals would be there. God knows what must have happened to that man. And he was furious that I would have used that word in order to help the old man. So the master smiles and says, do you know who that old man was? Sir, I don't know. He says, he is my master who had given me the word. So he is the master of the masters who had given him the word. And although the master had the word, he did not use those powers to help himself to come inside the village. So in other words, the master tells him, okay, you are still very raw, immature to get that word. In other words, power is such a thing that it can tempt us to do things in the assumption that we are doing some good to the others, whereas actually it's a misuse of powers according to the spiritual standards. Thank you. No, I haven't read the... Okay. I'll read out the paragraph. Some subtle conscious human souls neither use nor misuse the tremendous flood of energy at its height, liberated in the subtle world. And when such souls do not fall prey to their desires, which are also at their zenith, these subtle conscious human souls cross the threshold of the fourth plane and gain the consciousness of the fifth plane. As against the earlier one, he had used it for the betterment, for the best in the spiritual sense. So he gained the sixth plane, threshold of the fourth plane, and gained the consciousness of the fifth plane in the domain of the mental world. Here, these mental conscious human souls are no longer slaves of their minds because they are now conscious of the first state of mind which controls thoughts. In the subtle world, they were slaves of the mind. They had no control of the thoughts. But the moment you go from the domain of power, which is the subtle, to the domain of mind, which is the mental, the first section is the thought, the second section is the feeling. The moment you go into that stage, all your power is lost. Why? Because now you are mind. Now you are conscious of mind. You are unconscious of subtle. And because you are unconscious of the energy world, you cannot create miracles.
The mental conscious human souls on the fifth and sixth planes are now fully conscious of mind and experience the mental world according to the degree of advancement of consciousness of the fifth and sixth planes. These mental conscious human souls of the fifth and sixth planes are no longer conscious of the degrees of consciousness of the first, second, third, and fourth planes of the subtle world, nor do they experience the subtle world any longer.
They do not experience because now they have gone into the mental.
Therefore, these mental conscious human souls are unconscious of the tremendous energy of the subtle world. Hence, these mental conscious human souls, although they are conscious masters of mind, are now absolutely unconscious of the power of energy of the subtle world, and it is for this reason that these mental conscious human souls never can perform any miracles.
On
They-
the fourth plane, they can create universes. On the fifth plane, you are progressing. You can't create a single miracle.
They can neither raise the dead, nor can they give sight to the blind, nor limbs to the maimed, in spite of their advanced consciousness being greater than the consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul. However, as these mental conscious human souls are the conscious masters of mind, they can create and control the minds of the gross conscious and subtle conscious human souls. For them, creating and controlling minds is but child's play if necessary.
Important word, if necessary. Mostly, these people allow things to happen, including the avatar, including the perfect masters, allow things to happen in the natural course. They do not interfere or intervene unless and until if it is absolutely necessary. So here Baba says that now although you have progressed further actually from the fourth to the fifth, you should be gaining more powers. But Baba says you cannot create a single miracle because now you are in the domain of the mind and not in the domain of the energy, and therefore you are not conscious of the energy. So how can you perform miracles? But because you are in the domain of the mind, you can create thoughts, you can control thoughts, you can manipulate thoughts of all the people below you. That means fourth, third, second, first in the subtle world, and also of all the gross conscious human being. They can do that if necessary. Only if necessary, they can control. In other words, although directly they will not be able to do a miracle, but if they find that somebody on the subtle sphere, in the subtle sphere, is trying to misuse, then they can create such thoughts into, put that thought in their mind so that they don't do it. Or even the other way around.
In the case of the mental conscious human soul, let us suppose that its position is near the sun, which we have taken for our standard as a simile. This soul,
This soul.
in human form, consciously imbibes and controls the aspects of mind, such as thoughts, desires, and emotions, and makes in the mental world the fullest use of mind which proceeds from the sun, which we, for the purpose of explanation, consider as the source.
See, as a simile, it started with, our chapter started a simile that a gross conscious is like a earth on earth, the subtle conscious is in the air, and now the mental conscious soul is very close to the sun. Not our sun, but the example, our sun, which is the source of energy for the subtle conscious human soul and the source of mind for the mental conscious human soul. So, in other words, now the person is very, very close to the source of the mind, which for our purpose we took it as the sun.
Thus, this mental conscious human soul in the realms of the fifth and sixth planes is not only fully conscious of the mind and its aspects, but it is also capable of creating and controlling the thoughts, desires, and emotions of all other minds too.
All of the mind, because beyond the fifth and the sixth, there is no mind. In the seventh plane, there is no mind, manonaj. So, in other words, the person on the fifth and the sixth, especially the fifth, will control the mind, and the sixth will control the feelings of everybody in creation. That means the gross and the subtle. Anybody who is in the gross world or the subtle world, they can control the mind, they can create thoughts and feelings, and they can do anything connected with the thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
The soul is now quite stable and can never fall or slide down to any lower levels of consciousness as could the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane, because the gross conscious human soul and subtle conscious human soul are the slaves of their minds, whereas the mental conscious human soul is the master of his mind.
So here Baba says that once you go into the fifth plane, you are absolutely safe. There is no question of sliding down ever at all, as against the one on the fourth plane. And then Baba goes on to say that except for those in the mental world, which is the fifth and the sixth plane, they are the master of the mind, whereas all other people, including the Mahayogi, including the person on the third plane, second, they are all slaves of the mind. Masters of energy, but slaves of mind.
Finally, the case of the self-conscious human soul is like a soul in the sun itself. While trying to understand the explanation, one should bear in mind that the reference to the sun is given only as a form of simile. One must not misunderstand this sun as our earthly sun, nor misunderstand our earthly sun as the real standard of the infinite and eternal source of infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, nor must we attach any significance whatsoever to our earth's sun, for our earth's sun is nothing but one of the objects of creation of the soul's own creating. This self-conscious human soul of the seventh plane is conscious of this sun, which we have taken as an example of the source of energy and mind. And although he invariably experiences and radiates eternally the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, in some cases such a soul also makes use of this infinite power, knowledge, and bliss directly and consciously for the emancipation of souls from the sanskaras of the gross, subtle, and mental worlds.
So now here ends the chapter. I'll read the last paragraph. Baba is, the whole aspect is a simile of a gross conscious human being as earth, subtle conscious human being in the air, mental conscious human being very close to the sun, which is the source of energy and mind. Only example, simile. It's not actually a source. It is just an object of creation. And from the sixth to the seventh, that means the mental conscious human being now becomes self-conscious. Self-conscious means God-conscious, God realization, self-realization, aham brahmasmi aspect. So, but that means that is the sun. That means one with the sun, one with God. But then Baba clarifies that not our sun, because it is just an example that he has given. I'll just read out the last paragraph. and then we go on to the next chapter. Finally, the case of the self-conscious human soul, capital S, is like a soul in the sun itself. The soul gazes into the sun. While trying to understand the explanation, one should bear in mind that the reference to the sun is given only as a form of simile. One must not misunderstand this sun as our earthly sun, nor misunderstand our earthly sun as the real standard of the infinite and eternal source of infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, not to be considered. Nor must we attach any significance whatsoever to our earthly sun, for our earth's sun is nothing but one of the objects of creation of the soul's own creating. So it is just an example, a simile which Baba had given. It doesn't have infinite knowledge, power, and bliss and all that. This self-conscious human soul of the seventh plane is conscious of this sun, which we have taken as an example of the source of energy and mind, and although he invariably experiences and radiates eternally the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, that means all those who are in the sun, that means all those who are God realized, they have infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. In some cases, such a soul also makes use of this infinite power, knowledge, and bliss. Yesterday we did that on realization, you either drop your body immediately, we did that state A1, 1A rather, or you retain your body, but you are not conscious of your body. That is the majzoobs. We have done that. Then there are people who, retaining God consciousness, also regains the consciousness of this ephemeral world, the so-called gross, subtle, and mental worlds, but know it as a shadow of God. Those are the saliks. They do not use their power, knowledge, and bliss. And then that is state B. And then state C is that of a kutub or a perfect master or a Sadguru who, retaining God consciousness, regains all the consciousness of the lower worlds, knows it as a shadow, knows it as nothing into nothing, but also uses power, infinite knowledge, power, and bliss for the benefit of everybody in creation, and they are called the perfect masters or the Sadgurus. So here we complete, is it? Yeah, oh, correct. Here we complete the part 6, and we are, sorry? Oh, I haven't read this. Okay. This self-conscious human soul on the seventh plane of the seventh plane is conscious of this sun. Of course I read it. Which we take as an example of the source of energy and mind, and although he invariably experiences and radiates eternally the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, in some cases such a soul also makes use of this infinite power, knowledge, and bliss directly and consciously for the emancipation of souls from the sanskaras of the gross, subtle, and mental worlds. And they are, as we said, the perfect master. Any questions? No questions. So now we still have time.
Part 7.
We go on to part 7.
The sevenfold veil. Kabir was a perfect master as well as a poet. Kabir Vani, his book of poems, is therefore the more unique because of his lucid expositions on God, love for God, the divine path, and illusory creation. Being a perfect master, Kabir has said things as much for the man in the street as for the initiate. He does not hesitate to disclose, both allegorically as well as in plain words, some of the spiritual secrets which, though within the grasp of ordinary man, are yet known only to the spiritually illumined ones who alone truly understand the deeper meaning underlying most of his sayings. There are yogis, those who practice a systematic course of esoteric knowledge, who can of themselves suspend their physical bodies in mid-air during the time they are in temporary samadhi trance. There are some who can bodily walk on water or fly in the air without the aid of external means, and yet all this is no sign or proof of their having experienced divine love. Weighed on the spiritual scales, these miracles have no value whatsoever. In fact, miracle mongering
systematic course of esoteric knowledge. They are following the yogic path. Who can of themselves suspend their physical bodies in mid-air during the time they are in a temporary samadhi trance. There are some who can bodily walk on water and fly in the air without the aid of external means, and yet all this is no sign or proof of their having experienced divine love. And that is why, to my understanding, Baba had never encouraged anybody to get into what we call as the yogic practices. They are good, they are very good, but they are to be handled with, you can call kid gloves. They are to be handled very carefully, because certain yogic exercises and yogic, whatever you call it, austerities, penances. I am not talking about the yoga, which is just asanas or some postures of the physical body. That is good for the health, physical health. I am talking about the arousing of the kundalini, you may say, the subtle energy, which is the journey from the backside. That's what Baba says. And it can unleash such tremendous powers at times that you are not able to handle it. And that is why, unless and until you have a master who is a master of yogic practices, and unless he is constantly with you, helping you in and around what you are doing, it could be a very risky game to venture into any kind of yogic exercises on your own. This is my understanding of Baba's teaching. He never advocated that path. So Baba says that even though people may fly in the air or walk on the water or do so many things, which are supposedly miraculous, still they are far, far, far away from the goal because they have not yet tasted the nectar of divine love. It is only divine love which will take us over there. Weighed on spiritual scales, these miracles have no value whatsoever. I remember, I may be wrong with the places and all that, that once Baba and the Mandali, mainly the women Mandali, they were somewhere in Banaras or wherever, where there are lots of yogis practicing yogic penances like, like standing on one leg or hanging themselves upside down on a tree or sleeping on a bed of nails and all that. And what I recollect, I am saying, Mani telling Baba, see Baba, we have got it so cheap that we got you, but these people are going through so much of penance, so much they are doing in order to reach you, in order to have you. And here we are not doing anything at all, we are just happily following you. And that is where Baba said, okay, because you had done all these in the past, that is why you have found me. Something like that. So in other words, what my understanding would be, that having found Baba, not found as found, really capital F, not that, but having come in the love orbit of Baba, it is not for us to do any of these things, not to dabble, not to get into what Baba calls spiritual acrobatics, no gymnastics, no need to go into it, just plain and simple. Remembering Him constantly in whatever that we are doing, and sincerely and honestly thinking that it is not you who is doing, it is Baba who is doing through you, honestly and sincerely. And at the end of that doing, whatever we may be doing, offer it to Baba, it's yours, without being affected by the results. Not being attached to the results, in my opinion, is the be-all and end-all of what we are expected to do from Baba. This is my understanding. Digressing a bit, how I remember now, many years back, I was told that K.K. Ramakrishnan, we all know him, Baba's secretary of the Pune Center, he's no more. So when you read Baba's things, sometimes you feel, oh, Baba has not asked us to do anything, how plain, how boring in a sense we should be doing. So he somehow managed to convey to Baba that I want to do some fast on a particular date, or I want to keep silence for certain this thing, or I want to get up in the morning and do meditation and stuff like that, something like that. And Baba shot back, retorted, what? You want to become a yogi? And he said, words to the effect, as I remember now, eat, drink and be merry, and continue doing my work as a pleasant hobby. That was Baba's words. He doesn't expect and he doesn't want us to do any of these things. There was another gentleman who again wanted to do such things and wrote to Baba, again words to the effect, as I remember, Baba writing back or conveying the message, that words to the effect again, and say, that do not be serving yourself by indulging in all these things. In other words, if tomorrow I say, oh, I must get up at 3 in the morning and do this meditation and do this and that, whatever it is, I don't do it. But if supposing, then it is actually I am serving myself. It is my ego that I am doing all these things. Do not be serving yourself by indulging in all these things. Words to the effect again, let your love flow naturally, and again that this is enough. This is enough to take care of everything. Love Baba naturally. If you do not take him to be God or the avatar is perfectly okay. Take him to be your friend, take him to be your elders member in the family, take him to be whatever you want to take him, but carry him along wherever you go, whenever you go, and however you go. So, in other words, remembrance is the key that will open the door to go inside Baba's, chamber, so to speak. Otherwise, all these things, you do anything. Baba said it in discourses. You do anything. But anything that you do from the platform, I am the doer, the limited, selfish, self-centered, egocentric I. I am doing this. It creates samskaras. It binds. It may be good binding, good samskaras. You will have a good life later on, better life next, if at all. But all the same, it is a binding. The only thing, according to my limited understanding, non-binding is, according to Baba's discourses, creating what is known as a provisional ego, which is subservient to that of the master. In other words, in simple terminology, it means that when you get up in the morning, think it is Baba getting up. When you eat breakfast, it is Baba eating breakfast, Baba taking bath. To a point where Baba said, even if you do something wrong, knowingly, think it is Baba doing wrong. All the time Baba and Baba and Baba. That will somehow pave the way for our limited self to really leave us, and then by His grace a time may come when we would actually realize that it is Baba only who is doing everything, and we offer everything to Him. It is all His. Nothing is of mine. That to me is the simplest, safest, surest, quickest way. Otherwise we get all jumbled up into a lot of things. Coming back to the reading, there are yogis who all these things. So weighing on spiritual scales, Baba says, these miracles have no value whatsoever. In fact, miracle mongering by the average yogi is not only poles apart from the spiritual path. There is something called the spiritual path, which is lesser and lesser of the false I. That is the spiritual path. And there is something called spiritualism. Spirituality and spiritualism are two different things. We'll come to that later on. Many people mistake that. They may do it. They may get into all kinds of occult practices and stuff like that, and they think that they are becoming spiritual. But that is spiritualism and not spirituality. So Baba says it has nothing to do with spiritual path, but is actually a hindrance. Bada. It's a hindrance to the individual's evolution towards spiritual progress. So why would anybody like to consciously create a boundary or a binding for one's self when we know from Baba that indulging in all these things is a spiritual hindrance? Now we go back
No, I'll
to...
read this much.
Okay, read it. That is better.
The following incident in the life of a Hindu master shows the disregard in which it is held by perfect masters who are truth personified.
Means in the truth personified masters, they just give a damn, so to speak, to all these miracles. They don't care for all these things. They are never into all these things.
The master was one day by the river's edge waiting for one of the little ferry boats that take passengers across the stream for the diminutive fare of 1 anna. A yogi, seeing him thus waiting, came up to him, literally walking across the river and back, and said, walked across the river and back and said, "That was much easier, was it not?" The master smilingly replied, "Yes, and had less value than that of the boat fare 1 anna."
Somebody wanted to, when a master, which means obviously when Baba says master, he is a perfect master. Perfect master means there's highest, infinite knowledge, infinite power, infinite bliss. He is waiting for the ferry boat to come so that he can go into the ferry boat and go across the river by paying that 1 anna fare. So somebody comes up, bloated with ego, and he walks across and tells the master, "This is simple, this is easier, don't you think so?" And the master replies, that yes, and it has a value of less than an ana, that way. All right, now we are supposed to go to page number
208.
208, but I don't think we should start that, Soumya, because now we don't have time. We only, 1 minute.
This much you can read.
Okay.
Different
Okay.
Supplement 11. Different types of miracles.
We are now on page number 208, supplement number 11, different types of miracles.
Meher Baba has given us an explanation of the difference between the miracles of 1. A savior, avatar; 2. A perfect master, Sadguru; 3. A peer and a wali, that is, one on the 6th or 5th plane respectively; 4. Those on the lower planes, that is, 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th. In connection with these 4 types, Meher Baba tells us: 1. The miracles of a savior are of a universal character and are performed when universally necessary. When a savior intends working a miracle, he stations himself for the time being on the 6th, 5th or 4th plane as demanded by circumstances. When, however, it is desired that the miracles be very forceful, he stations himself for the time being on the 4th plane.
Now we must understand that whenever we read supplement, these may or may not be the direct words of Meher Baba. The supplements, to our understanding, is mostly written by Dr. Ghani. Dr. Yeah, I'm coming to that. Dr. Abdul Ghani Munsif. And Baba gave the manuscripts to the editors and said that if you feel it's worthwhile, you can add or you can do whatever you want to do. And the editors, namely Ivy Odius, Murshid Ivy Odius and Don Stevens, they felt that the very fact that Baba has given it to us, it means there is some substance in it, and so we better use it. So a lot of editing must have gone through, and definitely Baba must have gone through. It's not that something is not so apt, but these may not be the exact words of Baba, like the earlier chapter, the earlier parts, except for one part where Baba had asked Iraj to write, and then also Baba has gone through it. We'll come to that. So you're... Yeah. No, what I'm saying is, because here, so for example, such a question did come to me on my WhatsApp, it says Meher Baba. I said, yeah, but this is from the supplement. Here it says, Meher Baba has given us an explanation of the difference between the miracles. That means these are not exact words of Meher Baba, the editor, but Baba has approved. One is the savior, which means the avatar, which means the Rasul, which means the Messiah of God, the Son of God, the Messenger of God. So whenever Baba says the miracles of the savior are of a universal character, they don't do miracles which are circumscribed to a certain country or a certain place. They do it universally, because one of the aspects of the avatar's working is to give a universal spiritual push. That is a job, that is a duty of the avatar. It is not of the perfect master. It is one of the distinctive factors between the duties of the perfect master and the avatar. So, which are to be performed universally. When a savior intends working a miracle, he stations himself for a time being on the 6th, 5th or 4th plane as demanded by circumstances. My understanding would be that if there is a miracle to take place, see, 6th and the 5th plane are not the planes for miracles. They are not the energy world. So that means, my limited understanding says that if he has to change the thinking pattern of the universe, of the entire creation, then maybe he is working from the 5th. The feeling pattern, then maybe on the 6th. And if he has to really use the so-called miracle which requires a lot of energy or a force, then he stations himself for the time being, temporarily, on the fourth plane, because that is the full plane of energy. So, fourth plane, yeah. When, however, it is desired that the miracles be forceful, he stations himself for the time being on the fourth plane. We were told that Jesus Christ has created so many miracles, we know it. So his station was most of the time on the fourth plane because he was using powers to miracles. I think it's almost, yeah, one more minute to go. I don't think we should start again. Any questions to ask? Yes, Naman? Hmm. Yes. Well, Naman says Baba gives the example of a scientist who had all the powers of nuclear energy in consciously knowing what can happen. Well, I don't know if the question is whether it's just an example or actually it happened. My answer would be I don't know. But the example that is given is just to make us realize. Sorry?
It's illustrative.
Is that illustrative that on the energy world that is on the fourth plane, there is so much of energy and there is so much of temptation, and if you give in to temptation, you shatter and go back to stone. So, but we cannot understand energy, we cannot understand fourth plane, we don't know. So Baba is giving us an example of the gross plane of a scientist who has, who can explode a bomb, and the first person to be affected is he himself, to such a point that he does not even remember his past life, his childhood, his wife, children, everything, and he's like dementia. What does the word use? Not dementia.
No.
Anyway, so he forgot. It's loss of memory, amnesia, loss of memory. So it is just an example, I would say. Yeah, but you don't do that if you get the power. Huh? Okay. Any more questions? So thank you, Baba. We meet again on Thursday. Yeah, you have a question.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. See, the gross body is maintained in the gross world, the subtle world, the mental world, and also in the reality. That means even God consciousness, when you get, you can, there are many who just drop their bodies immediately on achieving God realization. We did that in the last session. But there are some who can hold on to their bodies for a certain period of time. And then, of course, there are these Sadgurus, perfect masters. They live for several years or according to the requirement, and they use the power, knowledge, and bliss for the benefit. So, if your question is that a person in the subtle world would have a gross body, yes. Mental world, gross body, yes. But they are not conscious of the gross. Yes, because any progress, any spiritual progress can be had only in the gross body. Even God realization is to be had only in the gross body. Once you leave your body and go into the other side, the astral world or the semi-subtle world, and the experience of heaven and hell, there is no real spiritual progress as such, except for utilizing the samskaras, which are prepondering samskaras. Okay. You should be You should read the earlier sessions. We have done that before. That Baba says the moment a person enters into the subtle world, the question is how do you identify? The moment you enter into the subtle world, we have got 5 senses that the sense of touch and the sense of taste goes away in the subtle world. And as you progress, the other senses, sense of hearing, and only the sense of sight remains till the end, the 6th plane of consciousness. So one of the indicators which Baba has given is that you do not feel the way a normal feeling means this samvedna, like this, You won't feel the way a normal gross conscious person would feel when you are in the subtle world. You won't be able to distinguish between the taste. We do that even in COVID, we did not know how the taste, but that's a different thing. Yeah. Sorry?
Personal.
Yeah. I would suggest that on the platform of Avatar Meherabad Trust, you can take the link from me or from anybody. This is the 14th session, isn't it? Yeah. So you missed out quite a bit. So once you read it all through, all these questions would be answered because we already covered that part. Okay. We can't identify. We cannot identify. Even perfect masters, because Baba said that these are my perfect masters, because Baba said Kabir is a perfect master, Maulana Rumi, Shamshed Tabriz, so we know that they are perfect masters. Otherwise we would not know. How would we know? We simply categorize them as saintly people, somebody of the higher order, something like that. We can't Baba has categorized, a Mahayogi, a Satpurush, a Mahapurush, Peer Wali, a Sadguru. We do not know. We can't make out. We cannot make out. And we should not even bother to make out for a simple reason that we have the roots, the highest of the high. Why go after the branches? Okay. Thank you, Baba. Thanks to all of you. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. Jai Baba.